I'm Summer Huntington of Steel Mace Vinyasa and Shala, and today I'll be demonstrating 3 exercises you can do to lengthen your hamstrings with the steel mace. You'll see I have my Steel Mace Vinyasa Level 1 manual in my hand here. This is 190 pages, pure gold. There's mobility, there's conditioning exercises, there's loaded asana poses, and this is what we use at our Steel Mace Vinyasa Level 1 seminar. We have one coming up in Seattle in April. We have another one in Oklahoma and in London later on in the fall. You can check out all of the seminar details on the workshops tab at the Shala website. So I'm actually going to use this manual to find a couple different exercises for hamstrings. So I'm going to open my manual to the conditioning section. A lot of my coaches will bring their manuals to their classes to reference poses, and I'm just going to open it up to the specific 3 exercises that I'll be demonstrating. So I've got my manual right in front of me, and then I have my 7-pound mace. Now, most people have pretty tight hamstrings, and stretching is really not going to be the thing that gets that to change or to shift. But when you're able to move a light load through the entire range of motion that you have ability to access with a light load, that's when you're going to start to see some changes in the length of the muscle belly, as well as the length of the tendons and the ligaments surrounding the joint. So let's start with easiest one. Take an under-over grip. So one hand under the globe, one hand over. I'll demonstrate kind of sideways or diagonal here so you can see my whole profile. So I start with my mace in my solar plexus position, ripping and crushing. Feet are hip distance apart. I micro bend my knees, and then go ahead and hinge forward with a long back, lengthen through the crown of head, and rise up, squeeze the glutes at the top. Again, hinge forward. This is just a straight-legged deadlift. Hinging, squeezing glutes at the top, creating torque with the mace. Over time, this can turn into something like a forward fold with load, lifting halfway and rising up. I could add levels of sophistication or complexity by lifting my mace up and overhead, performing a mace switch, hinge, nice flat back, rise up. From the side, it looks like this. Micro bend in the knees, rip the mace apart, rip the ground apart, hinge forward with the flat back. If I'm coming all the way down into forward fold with a spinal flexion, that's great. I can lift and re-stabilize my spine here and drive up. Things to look out for are the lower back coming into like a concave or flex position. You'll notice I'm hinging from the hips, and that means my pelvis and my trunk are staying in a line. So I hinge here with a flat back versus a rounded back like this. So that is your straight-legged deadlift with an under-over grip. Next up, we have our wide-legged straddle stance with under-over grip, and I'll show a few different mace variations as well. So in a wide-legged straddle stance in yoga, usually you don't have a mace, and the variations to get there look like this. I'll usually come down, have my hands on the floor. Maybe I'm reaching my hands on the outsides of my feet here, pulling, pulling, pulling. Maybe I'm coming up into a twist of some kind. So these are typically what you'll see in an asana class. And all we're doing when we add a steel mace to that asana is we're conditioning it with reps. And so the magic happens in the reps. It's really important to go through the range of motion continuously. I usually use like a 90-second interval, but it's really getting those reps coming in and out to the posture, training the transition under load that really allows you to create length in the ligaments, the tendons, the muscle belly, and also help you have the motor control to access the asana or the pose with control and with safety and with full fascial tension. So a couple variations for your hands. You can take an under-over grip, rip and crush, hinge forward with a nice flat back. If you have tight hamstrings here, you could bend your knees a little bit. I'll show this from this side in just a moment. I'm going beyond 90 degrees here. I rise up, I squeeze my glutes at the top. Maybe I press my mace up into like a blocking position. I bring the mace back down to solar plexus and do a mace switch. Inhale to come down. Micro bend the knees, feel that big stretch in the hamstrings. The hamstrings are responsible for pulling me back up. And then I press up. Let's say I wanted to bring some dynamic motion into that. I could do my wide-legged straddle with a forward fold. Can press up. Maybe if I have a drop swing in my practice, perform a drop swing, mace switch, hinge forward, nice flat back, especially in the lower back. Press up, drop swing, bring it back down, mace switch. Maybe I'm just doing a regular 360 swing, under over grip, hinge, press up, 360 swing, hinge, press up and stack. So I like to add levels of complexity. This is what Steel Mace Vinyasa is all about. When we're accessing flow state, we want to switch things up. We want to add layers of complexity to keep our mind engaged. From the side, it looks like this. Ripping and crushing, hinge forward, nice flat back. Rise up, squeeze glutes at the top, drop swing, mace switch, hinge. Notice I'm not rounding, I'm micro bending my knees and hinging to keep my pelvis and my trunk in a line, and my lumbar spine is nice and flat and not concave. So I hinge, I press, I add my drop swing, under over grip, mace switch at the solar plexus, rip, crush, engage the lats, hinge, nice flat back. Each time I'm getting a little deeper, I'm really feeling that load in my hamstrings. I press up, I drop swing, and then I do a mace switch. One more time on the other side, do it with me, nice and slow. Not really worried about speed here, but worried about precision, muscle activation, control, firing your stabilizers as you come down. So that's the wide-legged straddle with load, doing repetitions. And if you were to take the load away, what's left is a nice, clean, wide-legged straddle. I've been here before, my muscles know exactly where to go, so I can take my load away and really work the posture, pulling, 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 eventually getting my forehead down towards the floor. Other variations, stretch the hands forward. I can stretch my hands back behind me. I can add a twist on either side. And I always want to come up with that nice flat back. And then you can jump your feet together, classical asana style, entry and exodus too. Jump out like this. Okay, the third one, my favorite one. So we did 2 feet together facing forward, easiest. Then we did a little more challenging, wide base of support in the wide-legged straddle. The third one I'm going to show you is actually the most challenging because now we're in a staggered stance, which requires a little bit more balance. So you can start with your mace in an under over grip, start in mountain pose at the front of your mat. Take a knee bend to bear load on the front leg as you step back, and then step back into a closed hip position with the back foot about 45 degrees facing forward. Versus externally rotated like Warrior 2, that's open hip. In Steel Mace Vinyasa, we differentiate. This is closed hip when both hip bones are facing the front of the mat. So you might recognize this as a pyramid leg stance. Let's go for it. So easiest variation, mace at solar plexus. Inhale, exhale, hinge forward. Now here I'm isolating just my front hamstring, loading, and then pressing up, finding stability in my spine, reaching all the way up into my blocking position here. I can come back down, hinge. So easiest variation is to hold the mace in the under over grip and just do your repetitions here. Hinge, squeeze back glute, maybe press if you have the shoulder mobility and shoulder strength. Next variation, I can have my mace in a wide prayer position. So this is regular prayer, this is wide prayer. I want to be careful if I'm a male-bodied person to be careful that the mace doesn't drive between my legs. So I want to have that tail high enough up, and then this mace would be slightly above my head if I had a longer mace. So I rip and crush my mace. I micro bend my front knee, and again, it's that pelvic tilt. I want to tilt my sits bones back towards the wall behind me. So hinge, hinge, hinge. And this might be where you're at. If you have tight hamstrings, like this is plenty. You're loading your hamstrings, you're getting a nice stretch. Rise up, you can slide this hand here, maybe press it all the way up to a 2-handed torch. Come back down, wide-handed prayer. Inhale down. Let's say I had a low ceiling. I could press my mace out to 2-handed flag like this. Rip, crush, activate those lats. Micro bend front knee, especially if you have mobile joints. You would hinge forward, ripping and crushing. You're in that staggered stance, really working on balance and ankle stability. When you rise up, square the hips forward, press out. This is actually a blocking position when we look at combat or martial arts. So this is my pyramid to 2-handed flag with reps. Same thing on the opposite side. Switch hand positions. We'll start with the under over grip. See that the hips are squared forward. Again, in my manual, this would be under the closed hip section, closed hip conditioning, and the focus is hamstring lengthening. Solar plexus position with under over grip, rip crush. This under over grip is great for just recruiting your rotator cuff muscles, your lats, and just keeping your spine activated and not rounded forward. We really want to be here with the scapula in a neutral position. Micro bend front leg, hinge, hinge, hinge. ripping, crushing. I hang out here for a moment so that my hamstrings get that stimulus of load, and then I use my hamstring, my front hamstring, to drive up, option to press up into that blocking position. Lower the mace back down, hinge, 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 working on shining the sits bones back behind me and rising up. Other variations, I could take my wide-handed or wide grip prayer position, hinge, just being mindful of the tail, rising up, sliding the hand to meet the other hand in a two-handed torch. Or I could keep it in a flag position. If I had a low ceiling, I could press here. Strong shoulders, squaring up the hips, activating, micro-bending the front knee instead of locking out. I hinge, I press. In conditioning, Steel Mace Vinyasa exercises, we always want to use that power breath. So we condition, we do our reps, 90 seconds work, 30 seconds of rest. We got a little mini conditioning circuit built into the middle of class, and then we go into loaded and unloaded flow. So ideally, if I was to take my load away, what's left is a nice clean pyramid pose. So I can enter pyramid pose like modified forehead to knee, or full pyramid with your hands pressed together, thumbs crossed. You can come in and out of that posture with ease because I trained it with load. Inhale, exhale, hinge forward. Modified variation, forehead to knee. Keep working your back hip forward and your front hamstring nice and long. You can crawl your hands forward, press palms together, hover, hover, hover. Rise up with a nice flat back. Return to mountain pose. So, Steel Mace Vinyasa is a very carefully curated system. It involves priming the muscles before moving them, so moving in specific patterns to mobilize the muscles and the tissues and the fascia, then performing conditioning drills. So basically training the transitions in yoga under a light load. And then the third phase is the flow. So that means we're adding the load to the yoga asana and then removing the load so that what's left is a really fortified and strong and stable posture. If you're thinking about getting certified, I highly recommend going to the Shala website, checking out all the workshops for the year. We do offer a virtual workshop for pretty much every seminar, not our retreats, but our seminars, and there's lots of online training materials as well. Can't wait to see you and meet you in person.